Hello, it's Brad Laurie or BlockchainBrad, and today we're talking about all things IoTeX. With me, I have one of the key members of IoTeX. His name is Larry. Larry, thank you very much for being on the channel today.
Great to be here, Brad.
Now, just to clarify, Larry is the head of business development, so he knows all about what's happening now and obviously in the future for IoTeX. Larry, it's exciting to hear that you are making moves now as a team. Finally, there's some serious business going on after all this time you've been building technologically. Tell us a bit about IoTeX, though, in a nutshell. Where are you at? What do you stand for? And what are your key fundamentals?
Absolutely. So IoTeX is the privacy-centric blockchain platform designed and optimized for the Internet of Things. Right now, we have a team of around 25 globally. Most of the team is out here in Silicon Valley, but we also have a hardware office in Shenzhen and a small business development office in Singapore. And what our goal is really creating a smart contract platform that's robust, scalable, but also has the features that people need to create brand new privacy and IoT focused applications. Right. And I think above and beyond kind of the protocol design, the underlying infrastructure, we're really trying to make it easy for people to utilize IoT and blockchain. And I would love to describe the synergies about those two technologies later on. But we're also very focused on privacy, which seems to be the hot topic of 2019. Right. And some very interesting things going on in that realm as well.
Sure. Now, obviously, as you mentioned before, privacy is key. Now, in that respect, there's a lot of conversations about types of privacy all the way back to the original iterations of blockchain itself with BTC. Now, the privacy centrism, you talk about that not just, as you've discussed now, but right down to the white paper. What is it referring to, and what kind of privacies are we talking about, and why do they even matter?
Right. So within the realm of the Internet of Things, right now, if you think about the Internet of Things as all these different connected devices in the world, right now there's around 10, 15 billion connected devices. A lot of projections around 5 years from now, that number is going to hit 100 billion. So not only is the number of devices increasing, but the amount and types of data that these devices are capturing is going to be very important to first secure that data. And secondly, allow people to share it privately and store it privately. I think there's a common saying that data is the new gold. And if that really is going to be the convention going forward, privacy is going to play a huge part. So, our long-term focus is creating a platform that comes natively with a lot of privacy features. One thing that we're launching next quarter, probably around Q2, April or May, is a privacy-preserving subchain. It's going to let people send private transactions, execute private smart contracts, and the like. And what a private smart contract does is it allows you to compute something without ever leaking any of the underlying information or the inputs, if you will. One specific use case we're working on for this is private credit scores. So in America, there was a huge hack with Equifax. Over half of the country lost their social security number. So that's out there in the ethos. So what this private smart contract can do is calculate your credit score without ever needing to kind of expose your personal information.
I see. So it's also about protecting the consumer and the user itself. But let's bring it back a bit more to the blockchain discussion for a moment, because a lot of people conflate privacy with anonymity. And in the beginnings, we saw the libertarian conversation about trying to essentially ensure that people had their own rights. They could arguably circumvent certain authorities. Now, can you talk us through the difference between that agenda and what you stand for with respect especially to enterprise?
Definitely. So, the way that pseudo-anonymity in the blockchain world has kind of played out is, just to give an example of Bitcoin, for example.
Sure.
Everyone's identity is kind of classified as this unique identifier, your public key. But, if your real world identity is ever linked to that public key, then everything you've ever done in the network is basically exposed through that public key. So it's really important that we first re-encrypt that, add that second layer of privacy. So if I wanted to send something, it's not address 1 sending to address 2. You're able to completely mask the sender, the receiver, and the value. And that's one thing that we're really focused on is how do we bring privacy to the blockchain while also not sacrificing too much scalability. And that's really at the protocol level. It really requires a lot of domain expertise. And this is kind of where the experience of the team comes from. Two of our co-founders, Ralan Chai and Xinqing Fan, are PhDs in cryptography, specifically focused on lightweight cryptography. How do we make these kind of cryptographic schemes apply to blockchain, but also not detriment any of the other things that we're really trying to
Sure.
optimize.
And I did notice that as well, the qualifications of many of the team members that you do have. Clearly having PhDs is one thing, but putting it in practice is the next step. Now, you've been building for some time, but I want to move back into the discussion of privacy related to enterprise for a moment, Larry, because one of the motivations I would assume for having this privacy-centric approach is because it appeases business interests. So talk us through why that would be the case, if that indeed is accurate.
Absolutely. And, I think privacy and enterprise, just to compare these two worlds around the consumer world, the retail world, and the enterprise world. The truth is not many consumers care about privacy today. I think it's just starting to be a topic of discussion that people are starting to really care about privacy. But in the enterprise world, that's something that people care very, very deeply about and will go to stretches of the world to really protect their data to maintain that competitive advantage in the enterprise space. So, one thing that we're really trying to enable is just give you an example of a project that we're working on. For a very, very large device manufacturer, we're working on a supply chain finance and supply chain track and trace platform. This specific company has a supply chain that's 13 layers deep, suppliers of suppliers of suppliers of suppliers, all the way up to this organization. And you can think of all the kind of separate permutations and groups of people that need to see data. You don't really want to publicly broadcast all of the data, but you want to selectively share it with certain parties, right? And that's what privacy allows you to do. A lot of people think about privacy as the mechanism by which you can, transfer money completely privately, but it's way, way more than that. It's how do you protect the kind of the assets of a company and of an individual, while also letting them use those data in the real world.
Right. So obviously enterprise is a key focus of the entire IoTeX team, given that so give us some examples perhaps of some of the kinds of partnerships and the relationship between IoTeX and the real world of business, especially with regard to IoT.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just jumping back to that quick example around this very large device manufacturer, we're actually working on a lot of different projects with them. We've been able to really build a rapport with them, gain their trust as technical partners. And, they have a lot of great ideas around how blockchain can apply in their world. Specifically for the supply chain finance platform, what this is going to allow them to do is the supply chain world is kind of broken today. Very, very manual, a lot of paper documentation, nothing is really digitized at this point. So they're almost trying to leapfrog a lot of the cloud-enabled features and capabilities and jump right into blockchain. How are we able to share things more consistently and freely with our entire supply chain network? How are we able to track our assets using IoT? How are we able to better predict cash flows using the supply chain finance platform? And it really goes back to the concept of blockchain as a whole, right? Blockchain is a great mechanism to build trust across otherwise untrusted parties. So, taking that example and applying it to the world of the Internet of Things, IoT is kind of the technology that generates all of this data, and blockchain is the one that adds trust to it and allows people to send it privately or publicly. It really adds a lot of flexibility to what enterprises' goals are and how they really interact with their clients.
Right. Now, in that respect, Larry, obviously you're talking a lot about enterprise. So in that context, is it fair to say that you are essentially a business as well? Not simply this narrative we hear in 2017, 18 of startups, but indeed you are trying to establish yourself as a viable business.
Absolutely. At the core of it, IoTeX is a nonprofit foundation. We're a smart contract platform. Everything's fully open source. So I wouldn't necessarily call us a revenue generating company. And there is a consumer side to our project, which we'll dig a little deeper into later. But this enterprise thing is very, very important to us. I think our technology lends itself, and a lot of enterprises can relate with what our vision is. Our vision is really to create this decentralized trust fabric that lets not only people within a consortium and the already partners kind of collaborate, we can collaborate with anyone. That's kind of the beauty of blockchain. It's kind of, fully open source, allows anyone to join, and, extending that, we'll see how the enterprise really takes on the challenge of using and implementing blockchain. But, we're really excited with the traction that we've gotten so far.
Absolutely. Well, it's good. It'll be good to talk to you more about exactly how the plan is to be some sort of viable business, but also separate that from the foundation that you are, because there's clearly a need for that revenue, and I do want to explore that further. But let's talk about now those buzzwords that we hear thrown around in every blockchain entity, and that are privacy, scalability, interoperability. We've ticked the first box already. Let's discuss the other two in terms of how you're approaching scalability in a real practical way with evidence to back it.
So scalability, we think of this in kind of two different forms, right? The first is the choice of consensus mechanism, and the second is our choice of architecture. So, there's a lot of different consensus mechanisms out there. That's kind of the core differentiator of a lot of networks. We're starting to see three big families emerge, right? One is proof of work, the second is proof of stake, and the third is delegated proof of stake. And, just for viewers, proof of work is what's used by Bitcoin. The way Bitcoin reaches consensus is they issue a very hard puzzle to every miner, and whoever can solve that puzzle first has the right to put the next block. Very energy intensive, but fully decentralized. It's really important to think about the trade-offs across these different families of consensus mechanisms. The second one is proof of stake, which is going to be used by Ethereum in the near future. I think there's still a hybrid right now. Right. But what that is anyone that stakes a certain amount of tokens is going to be, say you have 2% of the stake tokens. That means you're going to be chosen 2% of the time to mine a block. Right. And, that's starting to mix consensus with incentives. And, fully transitioning over to delegated proof of stake, this is where token holders will elect delegates, or block producers, as some networks call them, to run consensus on behalf of the network. And, some people may say, hey, that's kind of antithetical to the blockchain narrative. It's not fully decentralized. I think that's somewhat true. It's a trade-off that we've decided to make to really tackle that scalability issue. If you're reaching consensus amongst a smaller group of people, you're able to reach consensus faster, which is needed to power the future of global IoT. But that doesn't mean we just take that trade-off and call it a day. We're really trying to minimize the impacts of that trade-off. And one thing that we've done is we've taken delegated proof of stake, which was popularized by EOS and Tron and other networks, and we've modified it to be randomized. And this randomization adds decentralization to our consensus. So basically, we have a role in the network called the consensus delegate. The top 36 voted delegates by the entire community are called consensus delegates. And every epoch, which is one day currently, we randomly select 24 of those 36 to mine blocks for the network. So even though you're top 36, yeah.
Sure. Now, essentially, you're injecting democracy to an extent into the system of staking. That's not something uncommon right now. There's quite a few different blockchains trying to establish that kind of randomization through the verification process even. So clearly the agenda is to do as much as you can to democratize a quasi-centralized model, if it is possible.
And we do see this as a very, very big trend in the industry. I think, if you wanted to call 2018 the year of the ICO, at least the first half of 2018, then 2019, I think, is really the year of proof of stake and delegated proof of stake. Right. A lot of these corporations are, just kind of these validator services and block production kind of services. A lot of people are thinking about this, not just from a network perspective, but almost a cross-network perspective.
Sure. Now, in the context of utility, though, obviously there are two different narratives emerging. We see settlement type coins designed for more universal scaling to provide some sort of not just liquidity, but more about trying to be a transactable unit of account. Now, in this respect, utility is very different. Can you talk us through the distinctions? Because clearly some of these, as you mentioned, BTC is moving in a different direction, arguably, trying to be a universal representation of something. Whether it be a store of value or a unit of account for transactions. But utility is another thing. So in the light of the SEC, you're in SF right now. Clearly, there's a distinction there.
Right. I think Bitcoin itself is definitely a security, right? It's kind of the point of they're really a cryptocurrency, I would call them.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these other networks are kind of using the gas model where users will pay transaction fees to run transactions and execute smart contracts, which are transferred to the miner. So that's kind of how you close the loop, right?
Right.
I think that's the high level definition of a utility token. But
Mm-hmm.
we're starting to see a lot of other models emerge. Like people are trying to have a governance token mixed with a utility token, where every day that you hold the governance token, you're able to generate utility or fuel or gas fees that other networks call it. But we decided to stick with the one token model. I think having that separation is not really something that we've seen play out successfully yet,
Mm-hmm.
and it brings a lot of complexity into the onboarding of new folks. The two token model does sound promising, but that's something we could always transition to later if needed. But for
Sure.
now, I think we've taken a very deep thought into how to design our consensus and our governance. And we're really excited to start, issuing that in our mainnet, which is launching very, very soon.
Yes, and we're looking forward to hearing more about that in this discussion, because you're right at the cusp of that all-imperative mainnet. But there's also aspects to design that give you that competitive edge as well, and I've written them down. One of them, you argue, you're the blockchain in blockchain design. Another
Right.
is that we've discussed the privacy, but then there's the real-time aspect as well. So let's talk about those two. We haven't yet. Blockchain in blockchain, what does it even mean?
Yeah, so that's the second point of scalability that I wanted to mention. It's kind of our architecture. So IoTeX is a network where there's a few different types of blockchains. One is the root chain. It's kind of the orchestration layer that connects all the subchains, allows them to talk to each other, and basically maintains consensus on behalf of the entire network. The
Mm-hmm.
second layer that we're going to be building is called the gravity chain, and that's kind of like the governance layer. How voting is going to be run on it, all these great things. And finally, there's the execution layer, which are subchains. And subchains are basically, what we want to be able to do is in the cloud computing world, right now you can spin up an instance and, customize it to your use cases fit. What we're trying to do is be able to allow people to create a subchain just as they would a cloud instance. This subchain can be tailored specifically to your use case. It can use role DPoS, which is our consensus mechanism, or it can use a completely different consensus mechanism. And the great thing about it is the state of all these subchains is going to be stored on the root chain. So it's kind of, the root chain is the diary of the entire network. What has happened both on specific subchains and also to enable cross-chain communication.
I see, but how do you avoid the pressures of that root chain if indeed there's conversations and interaction? How do you minimize the kind of computational pressure we see where typically they're just used for transactions, for example, at that base layer?
Right. So the only kind of transactions that are going to be running on the root chain are just more of the cross-chain communication and the storing of the states of all the different subchains. This architecture, this blockchains and blockchains architecture, is not just one way to kind of enable interoperability across different subchains, but it's also a way to separate duties, right? So for example, all these voting transactions, take for example a blockchain like EOS. They don't have this multi-layer kind of architecture. So their voting transactions and their execution transactions all happen on the same blockchain. It's really introducing somewhat of a conflict of interest, especially when you're talking about block producers. For example, a block producer in EOS could choose to completely ignore the voting transactions and produce a block without those if they see that these transactions would have them get voted down.
Right, so it adds really in a flavor of subjectivity, and also it allows certain parties to capitalize on that as well. But more importantly is that you're freeing up the space. You're allowing for more productive outcomes because of that tiered structure of blockchains.
Right, exactly. So we have this concept of separation of duties. Mm-hmm. So, again, the execution layer, the governance layer, and the orchestration layer are all kind of in sync, but performing different functions. And ultimately, where the real diversity comes from is going to be at that execution layer, all these different subchains. So the first subchain we're going to be launching is going to be the privacy-preserving subchain. That's going to be utilizing a concept called secure multi-party computation, as well as trusted execution environments to really allow people to experience privacy for the very first time. I think a lot of people are working on this concept of private smart contracts, but I think we're going to be one of the first ones to really take a brand new approach to it.
Right.
So that's one subchain. And what we're going to be doing throughout 2019 is adding more subchains that are tailored more to specific use cases, whether they're smart homes, smart cities, IoT data marketplaces. All of these things can be optimized with custom architecture. So that's one thing we're trying to give to our users.
Now, those subchains also as well, Larry, they could be utilized in a multitude of verticals. The scope in which you could apply these is very, infinite, arguably. But I want to talk to you about the testing of them so far. So right now you're about to hit the mainnet, first step into this. So you would have done a lot of assessment, a lot of testing, a lot of trials. How has that gone so far?
It's going great. Every week for the past month or so, we've been releasing a brand new version of the mainnet. And, we'll jump into our Delegates program soon, but, the Delegates have really given us a great sounding board as to how the mainnet is performing. We've released a private beta of our testnet to those Delegates, and they've been rigorously testing it, helping us find any bugs, patch everything up. So right when we were ready to launch mainnet, it's going to be ready to go. But, the development of it is is progressing extremely well. I think one thing that we've been doing in 2018 is really focusing on building the underlying infrastructure and the underlying protocol that's going to be powering the root chain, which is the orchestration layer. In Q3, we're actually going to be launching our Gravity chain, which is more of the governance layer. For now, because community's tokens are kind of involved, we are running voting on Ethereum because it's much more stable at this point.
Right. So your ERC 21st.
Right. Okay. Exactly. So, and then finally, starting Q2, immediately next month is when we're going to start to be launching different subchains. And that's going to really provide, lower the barrier to entry for people to start creating applications on IoTeX. And, one other thing that we're launching in Q2 is a hardware development kit, IoT specifically, or IoT focus specifically. And that's going to be paired along with our privacy preserving subchain. And that's really going to be the first foray into developability and programmability of IoTeX.
Right. Now, obviously, that's going to be very interesting to developers out there who would like to utilize the platform. DApp builders, no doubt, are already existent and have the attention of both you guys, and surely they are trying to learn more about the technology. Have you had a lot of engagement so far? Is the uptake strong from developers to utilize the platform?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we're doing now is we're working more one-on-one with different enterprises that we're talking with, whether that's on proof of concepts or just conceptual design. People are still trying to figure out what they can build on blockchain. We're starting very small. What our ultimate approach throughout 2019 is to really create building blocks for people to build on top of. We're not really trying to release a full DApp at this point, but trying to break down that DApp into what makes this DApp special and how can we utilize it across different kind of verticals. IoT space specifically, people like to talk about it a lot as, what vertical are you working on? Are you working on smart home, supply chain, agriculture, wearables? But I suggest people to think about it more horizontally, right? Like all these different verticals have a lot of similarities in them. The need to connect battery powered devices and very resource constrained devices, the need to authenticate and register these devices,
right,
and ultimately the need for these devices to talk to each other, communicate with each other, pay each other, and just build that trust.
Right. It's much like, I suppose, the nervous system of the body in that analogy.
Exactly.
It's just that core fundamental aspect that can be applied in really any use case. It's the most important part is that you're building that nervous system for the enterprise. But to add to that, what about individual developers as well? I mean, are they also knocking on the IoTeX door and trying to learn how to utilize it to create their own dApps, for example, to utilize the technology in some way?
Absolutely. I think the individual developers, we're encouraging them to actually take our philosophy as well. So one really important initiative that we're launching soon is kind of a IoTeX wish list. Up until now, truthfully, the development of IoTeX has been very internal, right? It's been the core team that's been building this for the last 1.5 years, really just sprinting. We have a lot of really, really talented engineers that have built something great, and now we're ready for people to build on top of it. So the immediate next step for us is inviting developers in to build more open source tooling, right? Like what can developers build that other developers can build on top of? And before you know it, I think, really taking like a modular approach to it. Like, how can we combine these open source blocks and create something of value and of interest to both consumers and enterprises?
Right. Now, one of the big developments you have had in the recent past is you're developing the Delegate system. That's really important to attract the interest of those who would like to stake. You mentioned it already in the interview, but talk us through the imperative of this reward system in the context of the token economic model.
Absolutely. So, as again, we're a DPoS blockchain, delegated proof of stake.
Mm-hmm.
And the way DPoS works is token holders will vote for delegates to stake their tokens on behalf of the token holders. The delegates are rewarded for producing blocks and for basically maintaining the network. And delegates will generally trickle back down those rewards back to their voters. So, in other networks such as Tezos that are more proof of stake, they call it a service fee, where bakers or delegates or block producers will charge 15% service fee for staking your tokens. We kind of have a flipped model where delegates will redistribute 80 or 85% of the rewards back to their voters. So this is not just the delegate thing. Voting in our network is extremely important and something that just went live on March 11th. So very, very new. We've already hit, one day into voting, we've already hit 85% of what we need to launch the mainnet securely. So we're really excited about that. It's really about the community coming together.
Right. So you're literally rewarding voters. You're not just rewarding those node holders.
Right. And, it's really up to the delegate to decide. Every delegate comes from a unique background, unique team, unique plans for the network. Right now, the delegate pool is consisting of, private sale investors or just general funds. We have around 12 or 13 developer groups on board as developers. They have experience in other networks or have been longtime supporters of IoTeX, really starting to learn the architecture and the infrastructure so they can start building. Another family of those is our brand ambassadors, our community leaders, our running delegates, as well as different types of ecosystem partners that are bringing new capabilities to the network. So this delegate program is kind of exactly. It's really an extension of our project. I think up to this point, it's been a lot of development from the core team and just the direct community. But having these formal delegates on board, everyone is really excited to just add value to the network. And that's really what DPoS is all about.
Got it. Now let's talk about some of the fundamental tech updates as well. What are some of those platform related, those products and service related components that really are showcasing the quality of your technology? For example, your developments on the Explorer, the IoT Explorer. No doubt there's more things that are to come in the pipeline too. So tell us what to expect tech-wise.
Yeah. So, in addition to this mainnet launch that we have at the end of March, 2019 is going to be a really action-packed year for IoTeX. I mentioned already the privacy-preserving subchain launching in Q2. And I briefly mentioned this hardware development kit that we're going to be launching in Q2 as well. It's going to be specific for IoTeX. It's going to allow people, it's kind of the entry path between our blockchain and the real world. They're going to be able to sync their devices. It's going to come fully stocked and ready to use that privacy-preserving subchain. So all the privacy features are going to be built into this tool. It's really going to be something great, I think, for the community and for the blockchain industry.
Right.
Looking forward to that. We're really working on the other pieces of our network, the Gravity chain as the governance layer. We're going to be fully migrating voting away from Ethereum onto our blockchain in Q3. And that's all leading up to the big mainnet GA launch, the publicly generally available version of our mainnet in Q4 of this year. And that Q4 milestone is really going to be the transition point of our project. As I mentioned, the core team has been the developers of IoTeX so far. At that point, we're going to hand the entire thing to the community. So even the core team, if they want to make a change, they're going to have to file a proposal. It's very community owned. And throughout this year, we're going to be working with our delegates and our developers to really kind of, bring them into the development and make it more community oriented. And we couldn't be more excited.
So this year is a big one because you're literally building up into that more, the relaxation of that centralized body to really afford for a more decentralized governance of the entire IoTeX ecosystem. Now that's a big deal. Obviously, we've seen some other blockchains evolve and do certain things like that, and it's been challenging. So are there any concerns you have with regard to relaxing that, that fundamental control that you do have now to support the ecosystem?
Yeah, it's always a little nerve-wracking, kind of losing control. But one thing we're really lucky is, we've got to see the kind of the path of other projects. What mistakes they have made, what things worked well for them. Although we're launching our mainnet a little later than some projects, we've gotten to see how things play out. So, a lot of these community-oriented projects like Tezos really aspire to be similar to that. They have a foundation that funds 5 different developer groups, all of which have sub-developer groups. And one thing we've learned is that organization is very key. A lot of people would like to contribute to the network. Sometimes they just don't know how. So leading them, telling them what's important at this stage of the project, and maintaining that transparency between core team and developer groups or just the general community is something that we prioritized ever since we launched. Our community is fully organic. We didn't do an ICO. We're not a hype machine. We don't spread fake or hyped news. So everything we've done is organic to this point. I think we built a great trust with our community, and now we're seeing that pay off.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that in the context again of your token, because you're talking about trust, you're talking about building an organic ecosystem with a great community to lead this out in the future. But you also have to really evidence clearly the value of this, almost paradoxically, as this utility token. And I genuinely mean value in terms of an economic standpoint as well. Now, if you're talking Q4 roughly for the mainnet that's coming, in terms of the full actualized mainnet with your own token, your own native token running that, talk us through why someone should take this seriously now? Because we see a lot of speculation in the space, to be fair. So a lot of people trying to trade on news. So why should people take it beyond that in terms of the true value of your utility as you're moving towards this full-scale mainnet system in Q4?
Yeah, so I want to answer that in 2 parts. One of which is kind of this new paradigm of staking in the network. And 2 is kind of the future utility or the use cases for our token. So, diving into this first part, I think, for your viewers, I think, or anyone watching, is really, really interesting what's happening in the blockchain world, especially with proof of stake and DPoS projects. What's been introduced is this concept of staking. It's kind of antithetical to the highly volatile returns that one would get by day trading crypto. Instead, staking is kind of the concept of committing yourself to a network, both from a time perspective and from a token perspective, and being paid rewards in it. So for example, in our network, if someone is planning to stake tokens and vote for a delegate, they're going to be earning guaranteed 20 to 30% ROI on their returns. To some investors, it's not really, so some like crypto funds, it's not really what they get out of bed for in the morning.
Right.
But for anyone that's a hodler, instead of having your tokens sitting in cold storage, what you can be doing is across all these different proof of stake and DPoS networks, a really big opportunity to make steady returns on your crypto. And that's a very new paradigm that I think
so Larry,
people should get interested in.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but is this essentially almost likened to a transition from what we see as red chip to a more blue chip model, given that this is more about the long-term, dare I say, investment? Because obviously they're not securities, but there is a value, there's an inherent value in the staking model itself. So is it fair to say that some of the people who are more proponents of the staking model, they are also those who want to be in this game of blockchain for a lot longer?
Absolutely. So, the way that staking works in IoTeX is very unique. And we're the only project that's doing this is, in other networks, take for example, EOS. If you stake a token, one thing that they have is this concept of approval voting, where you can vote 30 times using that token. If you ask me, that's kind of a recipe for collusion. So we decided not to do that. Instead, we have 1 token equals 1 vote. So that's kind of the token side of things. But also, if you're a true believer in our project, you can stake those tokens for a set stake duration. Call it 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. That's going to give you bonus votes. So staking is both a concept of investing your resources and money, as well as investing your time. And, I think that combination, a lot of our voters have already, came up with all these different kind of voting portfolios around, I believe in this delegate only for 6 months or so. So I'm going to set my stake duration for him at that kind of level. But
Right.
you know, it's really giving flexibility to, you know, allow people to kind of translate how they really feel about a project in the form of staking.
And what does that do to the circulating supply? Talk us through that impact economically with the model. And obviously, given that there is a monetized aspect to the utility token itself.
Absolutely. You know, I think a lot of people think about staking as a way to solve the velocity problem, right? The velocity problem of
Right.
tokens basically says that, you know, if you lock your tokens or a good chunk of them, then that's going to reduce the volatility of your price in the long run because less velocity of your token is happening. You know, I think it's important to think of tokens as almost two separate buckets, right? You want to have your liquid piece and you want to have your locked piece, right? So this staked piece, one thing we're requiring to securely launch our mainnet is 20% of the circulating supply, which is just around 5% of the total supply, must be staked. And that's more, it's kind of like in Bitcoin, you know, you need 51% to do an attack on the network. You know, we want to make sure enough tokens are staked, enough skin in the game, so nothing bad happens when we bootstrap the mainnet.
Okay.
On the other side of the picture, you know, we're really thinking about how to maintain that liquidity in the market. You know, from a trader's perspective, this staking model might not be very valuable to them, but you know, they want to express their speculation or express their thoughts on a project through day trading. So ultimately, I think this is just another option for our community. However they want to do it, if they want to stake for 350 days and be that very long-term committed community member, or they want to day trade, or the best part of it is, if you have kind of a two-sided life, then you can do both of those things. You can stake part of your holdings and make a steady return on it, and you can try to day trade the rest.
Sure, it makes a lot of sense. Now, in the context of utility, if you're staking some of your interest in IoTeX, for example, where does the prospect of utility come into it if that's essentially being locked up? Because obviously use is active, it's real time. So talk us through that aspect as well.
Yeah, so the use part of it is something that we're really looking forward to as well. Like, we see our token in the future as the gateway to a lot of different IoT kind of use cases, right? Whether you are using our token in one of our partner networks to rent a bicycle in the sharing economy, or power different transactions in your smart home, or interact with different marketplaces that are selling IoT products. We really want to make this the IoTeX token kind of a peg to a lot of the different IoT applications that are going to be happening in the future. But to bring that back to today, you know, it's a little separate from the whole staking process, but the staking process itself is a way to basically invest your tokens. It's kind of like a certificate of deposit, right?
Right.
If you put those down today, then after 1 year, you're going to get 2% in the traditional financial world, thanks to the banks. But you know, in crypto networks, you can get a very healthy return, and that translates directly. You know, whether if you want to sell those tokens on the market, that can be profit for you, or it could be a way to just accumulate more tokens, so that in the future you can use more applications in the IoTeX network.
I see. So it's almost like you could treat it a bit like a banking system, whereby you're preempting value, you're preempting utility, and therefore you're much like a chipmunk collecting the chestnuts, you know, for that rainy day when you know, others may not have. You're being savvy about that. So it does make a lot of sense. But clearly the fundamental focus of the long term should be that utility of the entire ecosystem.
Absolutely. So, you know, in tandem, in parallel with kind of this delegates program and voters staking and all this stuff, you know, that's really what the core team, that's kind of our last hurrah, is how do we spend this year most effectively so that when we hand off this network to the community, it's going to be ready to go. People are going to be able to, not only on the developer side, launch dApps, but we want to make it so that users can use this token effectively. You know, maybe, you know, they use the IoTeX token in one certain type of application, say that, you know, they're using it to rent bicycles in a sharing economy. And by returning that bicycle on time and to the correct location, they get rewards in IoTeX, with which they can extract and use in another setting. And, you know, I think this interoperability or multiple uses of the token is something that a lot of blockchain networks are trying to tackle. How do we create interoperability across blockchains? But even within our specific IoTeX network, there's a lot of different use cases, and we're really looking forward to kind of sharing all of those with the community.
Absolutely. Now, with regard to the native token itself that's coming, it's mineable, as I understand. Talk us through that as well and what that means.
Yeah, so we're still ERC20. When we launch our Gravity chain, which is going to be the governance layer of our platform, that's going to be the time when voting migrates over to IoTeX. For now, we're still using ERC20, but the native token is ultimately it's kind of the rewards that people will get for staking and voting. So yeah, the native token, eventually is going to be fully mineable. And the way our mining works is out of the total supply, 100% of the total supply, 24% were sold in a private sale, 15% belongs to the team, 6% for community reward programs, 25% for ecosystem, 20 or so percent for developer fund. And finally, the remaining is mining rewards. So 12% of the total supply is reserved for mining rewards. That's where the native token really comes into play. All those different rewards are going to be coming in the form of the native token. And that's kind of the evolution of our project.
I see. And it's important. It's important that you've also factored that in for the community once they do this becomes a live decentralized network. But what about the lockups? I did notice that there's an unlock after 12 months. When does that actually happen, or has that happened in February this year?
Yeah. So I think you're mentioning the private sale distribution. So
right, exactly.
Our project is a little unconventional in the way we distribute our tokens. A lot of people sold, up to 50% of their tokens in an ICO. So even from day one, pre-mainnet, you had all these tokens flying around, just mostly as speculation tools.
Other projects are on pump and dumps as a huge problem in the market space.
Right, exactly. And on the other side of it, you have projects where they only launch their token once the mainnet launched. And that kind of removes a little bit of that speculation. It doesn't give people a chance to express how they feel about the project, but definitely clears any room for those pump and dump kind of situations. Sure. I would say we're somewhere in the middle, right? Like we released a very small quantity of tokens, not enough to create massive pump and dumps. It's more for people to purchase early on, get to know the network. So right now, even with our mainnet launch, we only have 25% of the total supply circulating. Throughout 2019, that's going to hit around 60%. So while we're launching the mainnet and while we're exposing new dApps and new tools and new services, it's going to kind of be proportional to the amount of tokens. So activity in the mainnet, we've always believed wants to be correlated with number of tokens.
So given that, surely despite the unlocked status of some of the investors now that invested in the time when the pre-sale was on, surely because there's going to be an increasing circulating supply in 2019, many of them are aware of that and value the potential value or prospective value of this next year. Right.
I would say we're very fairly unknown for, I guess, the sophistication of our technology. It lends itself to, mention the delegates from other networks that really impress. These guys are, the blockchain industry, unfortunately, is still very tribal. People are diehard EOS, diehard Tron, diehard Tezos. But, we've had a lot of great conversations with other networks that really are starting to see things in a cross-network fashion, right? IoTeX is serving a very specific niche, I would say. Privacy and IoT doesn't really conflict with any of the more general purpose blockchains out there. So, we're really trying to bring new blood into the ecosystem.
Got it. Now, in doing so, you also have ecosystem partners as well. You've got BlockBoost, NUS, and CPC. Now, what kind of role, what do they actually do to support you as you build out, or, because we've seen several superficial partnerships with other projects. So I really want to know what they do.
Yeah, so those ecosystem partners who are also our delegates, there's some great ones out there. National University of Singapore, Stanford is on board, CoinGecko, which is kind of a coin market type kind of kind of company.
That. Right.
Yeah, different wallets, different exchanges, and the ecosystem partners. We have two kind of partners, right? We have development partners who are basically building things, dApps, services, tools on our blockchain, and we have our ecosystem partners. Which are almost seen in a different kind of light to the community, right? It's almost like, what kind of open source tools have you built? Oh, nothing? Then you're not adding value. But that's really untrue. These people are offering a lot of connections, a lot of experience with other projects, and really the goal of the ecosystem partners is to bring new capabilities into our network. CoinGecko is going to be developing different types of market data APIs to make voting and price more transparent. NUS, National University of Singapore, is actually one of our academic research partners, working not on the blockchain side, but more on the crypto economic side of things.
Okay.
Stanford CPC is a pitch club from Stanford, and they're going to be helping connect different kind of startups coming out of Stanford to our blockchain. So, these are kind of like the unsung heroes, right? It's very clear what tools a developer has built, but sometimes these connections are invisible to a lot of the community, but definitely very important.
And that's what we were looking for, is that you had forethought as a team for the kinds of partnerships so that they had a purpose, not just simply to inflate price or to create FOMO. Now, other partnerships I've noticed through your Twitter, having read that today, Theta or Theta, however you pronounce it, is one of the ones you have been retweeting. Why is that? Is there something going on where there's a mutual interest there?
Yeah, this is really starting to expand into our future vision of the world, right? Like Theta, if people don't know about Theta, they're a very, very talented project partnering with Samsung VR. They're more using blockchain as a streaming platform.
Right.
And, they do a lot in esports and gaming and things like that. And although it's not directly applicable to, industrial IoT, for example, or smart homes and things like that, all of those streaming kind of capabilities are run on different types of devices, whether it's a mobile device, right? Whether it's a computer, whether, it's other types of devices. Devices are the gateway between the physical and the digital worlds. And Theta just so happens to live in that digital world. So nothing we can share that's completely concrete right now.
Clearly what you're saying is the two worlds of IoTeX and Theta lend themselves to some sort of reciprocal endeavor. Let's stop there. But that's what I'm seeing from those retweets and from the value that you both bring. Now, brand ambassadors, as you mentioned. So overall, you've got ambassador programs, you have your partnerships of all different types. How's everything leading out and looking for the rest of the year? Are you doing more of these kinds of things?
Yeah, so our brand ambassadors are, those are our community leaders from day one. And we're really excited to see a good group of them run as delegates. And not only run as delegates, but we really excel at being a delegate. One of our delegates, Simone, is actually in the top 5 of all delegates that are running. So that really, one thing we wanted to design in our kind of program was the ability for, not just the private sale investors and the funds who hold all of the tokens to be the de facto delegates in our network. We wanted to make it inclusive, lower the hardware requirements and the costs, and basically provide tools that, any community member can contribute as a delegate. We're excited to bring on many, many more brand ambassadors, especially in different countries. Right now, we're very big, I would say, in China, in US, starting to break out into Southeast Asia. But the next frontier for us is really going to be those hot kind of areas. Definitely in Europe. Germany's huge for IoT, already thinking a lot about privacy with GDPR. Definitely Korea, definitely Japan, and definitely South America, just all globally. So we're taking this opportunity of kind of capability expansion in our network to also do community expansion.
Sure. Now, you've got a whole strategy for that global community expansion approach, but let's now go to that all-important word of revenue. Now, a lot of people confuse revenue with the utility token. And quite frankly, the staking is probably one of the most important parts of the utility's value. But onboarding, building up a business, irrespective of IOTX's initial foundation-based and non-profit-based platform, you need to do something as an entity beyond. So what's the plan there with revenue? How are you going to build upon this as some sort of team effort?
Yeah, just to share a short story with you, we were just at CES earlier this year, Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. It's the kind of the biggest consumer electronics show in the world, or conference rather. And there we had really interesting conversations that we never really had before. A lot of people came up to us and say, you guys are a blockchain platform? Well, here's my idea for an application. Let's build it together and let's revenue share on it. And those are things that we've thought about before, but it's always been kind of outbound. We never had that inbound kind of a thought. So that really switched our thinking into, when we do kind of fully deliver this to the community, of course, we're still going to be active in pushing upgrades and making the platform as robust as possible for years to come. But also, what cool things can we really build on top of our platform? You know, given the fact that we know our platforms in and out, you know, we built this completely from scratch, didn't fork any other blockchains. So we know this like the back of our hand. What kind of cool things are we able to build with it? And you're already starting to see that more in the enterprise setting, you know, working one-on-one with these kind of enterprise partners. What they want to do is build these things for internal purposes first, and then using a similar model as Amazon Web Services. You know, AWS was built internally for Amazon, and once it was mature, it kind of expanded it to the entire world, licensed it. So we think that's a really interesting model. But you know, right now we're really focused on just completing our goal.
But it is good to hear. It is good to hear, though, that you're focused on the future in terms of being viable economically by having some sort of revenue stream for whatever that does become of itself, because that is not the fundamental non-profit angle that you're taking with this. Now, exchanges, you have already listed on substantial exchanges like Binance. You have all the way from Korea to the US and beyond. You're covering bases. Is there more movement to come? Are we going to see things like BitMax, for example? That's the big buzzword right now.
Absolutely. You know, we think about exchange strategy a lot, especially when we're trying to break into new regions. Right now, I think the biggest exchanges we're on are Binance, Bittrex, Upbit. But, you know, we're really trying to get those exchanges that are offering fiat pairs. You know, I think it's really a good approach to have a lot of different BTC pairs, ETH pairs out there. But a lot of people are not trying to, you know, especially for new users of crypto, they're trying to buy crypto with money, right? With cash. So looking to, you know, especially in those regions that we mentioned, talking to a lot of different exchanges. And, you know, one thing that's kind of hesitated our exchange strategy to date is we really think ahead, right? Like, given our low circulating supply, we didn't want to have our token kind of spread out on too many exchanges. We want people to go to a reputable exchange and have liquidity there so that they don't get kind of ripped off on whatever they're doing. Now that in 2019, we have more runway and more distribution of tokens, it's really a good setting to start listing on more exchanges. So that's something that we've been thinking about constantly, and now time to definitely take action.
Got it. So quality over quantity, and now you can start, because now you mentioned Runway. So do you have cash to spend? Because obviously some didn't cash out in their projects, and unfortunately they suffered the consequence of that in the bear. What about you? What's your cash flow like?
Definitely. So we raised our private sale in February of 2018, just about a year ago. Raised around 25 million USD at the time. In ETH, you know, obviously has dropped significantly. But we were lucky enough to, you know, have a lot of great advisors and partners to help us with that treasury management side of the project. So financially, we're good. We always imagined that 25 million that we raised would last us at least 2 to 3 years of development. You know, our high quality engineers are not cheap. Definitely a high burn per month, but you know, I think we're still good on that that cash perspective. And you know, another thing is, because we didn't sell a ton of tokens in our ICO, you know, we've allocated buckets specifically to our foundation and to kind of this developer group. So using those foundation tokens, sometime this year, we're, you know, above and beyond all these things we're talking about already, we have some other ambitions, you know, that we want to bring into the network. And using those foundation tokens, we may raise a second round. So definitely look out for that. But the flexibility is there. I think we're taking it one step at a time.
Right. And just to clarify, you're not possibly going to do that second round because you need the cash. You're doing it because you could want to build further into the ecosystem.
Right, exactly. So it's kind of like the general VC model, right? Series A is or seed and the Series A. But you know, people don't raise a Series B just to get more cash. It's more to expand into a different growth area. And I think that's the approach that we're going to be taking.
Got it. So it's almost like the new IPO model in some respects. Okay. Yeah. Now, the China hustle, I want to talk about that for a moment. Now, that does exist. We've seen the film. But with regard to China, there's a lot of suggestions from certain parties that there are divergent or differential agendas from some parties. Now, I certainly do not hold that position of one region in the globe being somehow different to the other. Absolutely not. But I
Mm-hmm.
had a look at your list of investors, and the majority of them do come from China or are linked to China in some way. Now, what do you say to that? Do you think it's a good thing to have such a strong presence of one region as your investor base?
Right. I think on the investment side, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I think at the time we raised money this time last year, it was honestly a pretty big sprint for a lot of Chinese investors to, invest outside of China, right? It's kind of what happened with the whole ICO ban in the first place. Too much capital was flowing outside of China. So they kind of put a stop to it. But when we raised, it's kind of at the peak of that. So I would say not necessarily a huge issue to us. But that's on the fundraising side. From the project perspective, we're really trying to build international presence, right? And just taking a quick look at our list of delegates, they come from all walks of life: Brazil, Germany, Italy, the US, definitely China, some from Korea. So really trying to build that geological diversity.
Got it. Right.
Yeah.
And that's going to transition everything, because that's how you do become truly universal, when it's applied through the nodes. Now, lots of challenges ahead. IoT in itself is something that your own website states as far from reaching mass adoption right now, but has a lot of potential in the future. Do you think you've chosen the right sort of vertical in addressing IoT in your whole approach?
Absolutely. And just give some background on IoT. Like right now, the reason why we say in our white paper that, IoT has not seen its full potential is what we've been promised with this Internet of Things is that, all devices will be connected to the internet, all devices will be able to talk to each other, and all the data that's sent between those will be kept secure and private. For today, we've only accomplished that first step. We've accomplished connecting everything to the internet. I was walking in the grocery store the other day. There's a Wi-Fi toothbrush. There's all these different, endpoints or devices that we've successfully connected to the internet. And this was especially true at CES. We saw all these types of devices, and we asked them, what's your security approach? How are you securing your data? How are you securing your client's data? And they don't have a great answer for that. And that's really where blockchain is going to come into play. I mentioned earlier that IoT is kind of the technology that generates data, and putting it on the blockchain is really the mechanism by which you add trust to that data. Really looking forward to maybe not in 2019, but in 2020, when privacy is in full swing, it's really going to be, I think we're really well positioned to create the first class of applications that's really going to, bring this paradigm forward. And, with that first mover advantage and our great partner network, I think we're really going to be able to evolve and, satisfy the full potential of IoT.
Well, it's certainly a challenge, no doubt, because obviously IoT coupled with blockchain is already quite ambitious. Given though that you did start quite early in this game and you're moving now to a full-blown mainnet by the end of the year, that's going to be exciting. Now, events, social media, channels, how can people find out more, Larry?
Yeah, absolutely. I would recommend that people check out, our website, IoTeX.io. And if you haven't taken a look at our white paper, I think not just saying this, it's one of the best reads. It really opens your mind, especially if you haven't thought about blockchain's application in privacy or IoT. Even if you're not, 100% interested in, the project itself, the concept of what we're trying to build, the vision, I think is relatable to everyone. So definitely check out those things. And I would encourage everyone to check out our Delegates program. Right now, you can go to member.iotex.io, and you're going to see all of our 50 delegates. You can click in their names and see what their background is, what their campaigns are, and you start to understand the DPoS and proof of stake model more. And definitely check out our Telegram group if you have any questions.
Got it. So obviously there's updates that are weekly on the Telegram. I've had a look at your Medium. There's clear articles posted there. There's a lot of information also, as Larry said, in the white paper. It's quite comprehensive. Larry, thank you very much for your time today. Obviously this was an entirely free interview. It was all designed for information and education. Hopefully all those who've listened have learned about the movement that they've made since they first started. They are moving forward. Mainnet is coming. Then there's a full-blown mainnet happening with a native token by the end of the year. Things are really happening, and they are focused very squarely on decentralization to enable you as potential users, as potential consumers and potential developers to start to build authentically in a real ecosystem that leads out something arguably revolutionary in terms of business and in terms of the future of what this technology can do. So thanks, Larry, for your time. And we'll look forward to seeing you and the rest of the team in IoTeX build more of this technology.
Thank you so much, Brad. And before this interview started, I saw that we had an interview almost exactly 1 year ago where you and Rowland spoke.
Right.
Even before we raised the private sale. So pencil us in for next year, March 2020.
Thank you
so much, Brad.
I definitely think it's going to be earlier. I think I might give you a call in the end of the year when your mainnet really starts to move. Thanks, mate, for your time. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Brad.